Welcome back. You're watching NewsX. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. In his first visit to India since Donald Trump's return to the White House this year, United States Vice President JD Vance is slated to arrive in New Delhi on a 4-day visit, during which the spotlight will remain on the key meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Vance will be landing at 10 a.m. tomorrow at the Palam Airbase in the national capital, along with his Indian origin wife, Usha, and their 3 children. Multiple engagements are planned for the top official of the Trump administration. Now, the visit comes at a time when India and the U.S. are negotiating a bilateral trade agreement, as President Trump's reciprocal tariff, which is on a 90-day pause, shook global markets, including in India. Amidst anticipation over the 19-chapter trade pact between India and the U.S., the question that arises is, are the two countries' ties going to soar to new heights? And how important is this visit by Vance to move ties forward in that direction? Joining us live at this point is Micah Pickus, U.S. foreign policy expert. He's live with us from Washington, D.C. Jim Rice, professor of international law, is also joining the broadcast. Pathikrit Pain, international affairs expert, is live with us too. Rubinder Sachdev, international affairs expert, is joining us as well live. Let me make a start with you first, Micah Pickus. All eyes, of course, on this visit by the United States Vice President to India. How important is this visit according to you? What is likely to be on the agenda?
First of all, I think it's incredibly important. I think it's showing I think Trump administration is sort of putting its money where its mouth is. I think if I recall correctly, Vance made a pit stop in Italy and the Vatican as well. So there are, he couldn't pick Germany or France or anyone else, but no, he picked Italy and India. And as far as India is concerned, I think we're seeing Trump wants to play ball with Modi. Modi seems interested in playing ball with the Trump administration, and I think that the counterweight of China is going to serve as a pretty significant motivating factor for both countries to get something done. It's a little hard to say what exactly will be done, but the things that were going to be on the table, I think, number one are the H-1B visas, since the United States benefits and India benefits, I think, from a lot of Telugu-speaking folks who end up going overseas to do software engineering and other stuff. That's how a lot of American companies make those sorts of hires. And then the other thing is going to be trade goals and China-related concerns, right? I think both nations have targeted, I think, around $500 billion US by, say, 2030 or so. So there's going to be discussions of that. And like I mentioned, the China aspect. That's the Indian government officials have made it pretty clear that they're more willing to play ball with the United States than they are with China.
Yes, let me also join Jim Rice in at this point. Jim, as far as, of course, now JD Vance is concerned, it's the first visit, by the United States Vice President since he took oath as Vice President of the United States of America. It's the first time he's coming to India. However, interestingly, he has met Prime Minister Modi before abroad. How do you see this visit? Where is it going to take India-US relations, and what is going to be top of his mind when he touches down in India tomorrow?
Well, thanks for having me on. I agree with most of what your guest said. I think he's largely right. In a sense, though, I think that to be blunt, J.D. Vance is perhaps the worst possible ambassador of goodwill that we could have, and it seems that every time he has gone abroad, he's been mired in some self-inflicted gaffes. For example, when he attended the Munich Security Conference, he lectured and attacked America's closest allies, and then he reached out to the far right-wing neo-fascist AfD party, further alienating and dismaying our NATO allies. And apart from his participation in Trump's illegal and unconstitutional deportation of migrants, which is a very bad look for him when he goes to places such as India. He, in his recent trip to Italy, for example, he was rebuked, I believe, by Vatican clerics because of his rather anti-Christian views about the way in which we should show love to our neighbors.
Pathikrit Pine is also joining the broadcast. Pathikrit, it's the first visit, of course, by JD Vance to India. But what makes it interesting is the fact that he will be accompanied by his Indian origin wife, Usha Vance, and their children as well. Interestingly, of course, while there will be the bilateral meetings that are expected, there's also going to be a lot of culture, which is on his agenda as well. Perhaps they want to explore their Indian roots a bit more in detail and expose their children to that too. Pathikrit, how do you view this visit and the interesting mixture of diplomacy and culture that is going to be happening as well?
Uday, first and foremost, JD Vance is Vice President of Trump administration. Trump administration has been democratically elected by the people of America, and therefore we would respect them because they are democratically elected. So I will not lecture on how JD Vance should be and should not be. Secondly, when it comes to the Vice President coming to India, the Vice President of the United States, I believe this is a work in progress. So we should not expect miracles, because when it comes to trade negotiations or there are other nitty-gritties, negotiations will go in their own way. But I think it is definitely in a positive way. And I think India is known for its philosophy of Atiti Deva Bhava, which means that we actually respect the guest as the divine, as a manifestation of the divine. So we would be very courteous whenever he is here or anybody else is here, and we would not lecture on what they should be and they should not be. Those who have lost the election, they should be graceful enough to accept the loss. So far as JD Vance is concerned, let me say one thing very bluntly. There are areas of convergence that India has with the United States. So invariably, there will be progress and growth. There will be realignments of supply chain. Some of the American business manufacturing hub which is there in China, they might try to diversify part of it in India, which is good, which is most welcome. And at the same time, when it comes to the trade negotiations, I think India would look for reciprocation in the sense that if you want more penetration into my market, you have to give the same in your market. Let me make it very blunt. There are areas that Americans are very protectionist. They need to open up on that as well. On the issue of China and everything, look, let me make it very clear. I think that the Americans also know very well that we have a policy of dehyphenation. And so we have very good relation with Trump administration or United States as a country, but that doesn't mean that India is going to disown BRICS. That's not going to happen. And I think United States should look at it as a positive, because I think we are the only country in the world which has been in talking terms with more major powers, and we can work in that way. So far in the larger context of culture is concerned, unfortunately, the West still looks at India through the prism of how the Western media projects India. So their understanding of Indian culture is very limited. So I think when the Vice President of the United States comes, and especially when he has his wife is of Indian origin, and I think he would have a better understanding and appreciation of India, because India is not just about Taj Mahal. It is far more profound than that. So I think on a larger note, if you look at the visit of Tulsi Gabbard, then the visit of JD Vance, and I think it's a work in progress. But I think, as I repeated, it's something from which we should not expect miracles. Let me say one thing. There has been a lot of problems that India faced during Biden administration, and yet we have been extremely courteous. We have been extremely sober. We have been extremely nuanced in our approach, because we are dealing with government of another country elected by the people of America. So I think that equidistance, that kind of the diplomatic culture that we have, that would be maintained here also, even though at a personal level, Trump has a lot of good relations with Prime Minister Modi. And one thing I must state on concluding note, I support Trump for dismantling wokeism, because that wokeism has created a lot of trouble in India as well. That wokeism is something that has created a lot of fault lines in India as well. Yes, there are issues of divergence as well. There are issues of status quo as well. So I don't expect, just because somebody is visiting, those issues may be discussed, but I don't expect those issues will be sorted out. Whether somebody gets deported from United States, that's the policy of United States government to decide. If anybody is illegally staying there, that's their choice to do. That is not something India will actually be, interfering too much. But yes, we are also a country working towards creating our own ecosystem of startups. We have the third largest. So brain drain is reality of India. So in some way in the future, if not right now.
Right. What about the cultural aspects, Pathikrit? You haven't touched upon that. The cultural aspects of the trip, given the fact that Usha Vance is, of course, of Indian origin, is of Hindu descent. We believe the trips to Agra, Jaipur, all on the agenda as well. Interestingly, their children also coming along with them.
Uday, I'll just take 2 minutes. If you go to Varanasi, and I'm sure, Uday, you have seen it most of the time, you will see the Americans and the Europeans in Varanasi, because spirituality is something that peace of mind, which may not come from material wealth as only, is something that India has always been propagating, has been a hotbed of. So I think JD Vance, you correctly mentioned, because his wife is of Indian origin, I think he has a better understanding. And in this world today, where there's so much of conflict going on, the whole essence of, this is not an era of what that Prime Minister Modi propagates, or the fact that when you talk about Ramayana or Mahabharata, in both the cases, initially efforts were made to prevent the conflicts from happening, whether it is Krishna or whether in case of Ram, both tried their best to prevent conflicts. Unfortunately, there is this whole charade of military industrial complexes in the West, which keeps on instigating conflicts. That's where the spirituality, the philosophy of peace might help to create better peace in the world. And in that context, I think JD Vance, having his family of Indian origin, in the context of his wife being of Indian origin, I think when he would come here, he would be a great brand ambassador of Indian spirituality and how it can heal a lot of issues that the world is facing today, which is not just about wealth creation, but beyond that. Back to you.
All right, let me join Rabinder Sachdev in as well at this point. Rabinder, as far as, of course, these talks with Prime Minister Modi are concerned, that meeting, of course, is expected to take place tomorrow. There are other, of course, key engagements as well in Delhi before, of course, the cultural aspect of, the Vice President's trip begins. What will be top of the table in those discussions?
Thank you, Uday, a pleasure. Couple of things before I come to what will be on the table. You see, this trip of Vance, the way it has emerged, is not normal. It's not known. Apparently, it started off as a planning for a private visit and for some marriage in Jaipur, by the way. And, it could be some old friend of his or his wife's, etc., or a destination wedding or whatever it be. So it started out apparently with something like that. And then it got converted into an official trip. Right. So as to the reason of this trip happening, maybe that is one factor. There is nothing bilateral scheduled between India and the US right now. There is no, summit level kind of thing happening between India and the US right now. Yes, a lot of work is in progress. So that's the background to this. And the children and the wife and all, and of course the culture of India and all, etc. So we should look at the origins of the trip also, I think. Now, as to what Vance will do when he's here on an official visit, I think there'll be two tracks on bilateral, of course, more. One is, of course, discussions on trade, but I leave that. So, ongoing India is negotiating whatever discussing. The other, which I think Vance will be more, occupied with, could be the trust initiative. When Modi went to the US in February or whenever, there was an MOU signed on TRUST, transforming relationships using strategic technologies. Okay, and that is the next level of collaboration, sharing between India and the US on strategic minerals, AI, quantum computing, semiconductor chips, the supply chains, etc. So this meeting here, I think we could see some good steps taken on that. And what emerges, by the way, from this, to my mind also, is that JD Vance is becoming the point person for the Trump administration for AI and related. Remember in France, when he met Modi, he had gone there for the AI summit hosted by Macron.
Yes.
Right. So, Vance appears to be the guy spearheading the technology, supply chains and futuristic minerals, etc. So one, his discussion would be on, trade and tariff related matters. Second would be, of course, on this trust. And the acronym has been chosen meaningfully, US and India have had a deficit of trust. One big jump we had was with the US-India civil nuclear deal, which moved forward, broke down a lot of distrust, and we got, high technology partnerships going, which still are not there where they should be. So this would be, I think, a next step, and that's why the acronym has been named in this way. So these are the two main bilateral. There could be other bilateral, areas of discussions, and of course the regional and the China, the Chinese context also out there. And then, so that's what I look at it. And then they're off to Jaipur and Agra for a cultural immersion, children, family, etc. And from what I know, I may be not correct, but from what I've heard, it's for a wedding that they're going there.
Yes, and now let's just talk, of course, for a second, Rubinder, about the cultural connect as well. Usha Vance being of Indian descent, Hindu heritage, it always helps, build bridges, doesn't it? JD Vance understands Indian culture, obviously because of his wife's heritage. They will be showing their children around India as well for the first time. So perhaps, of course, these could also lead to closeness in ties.
One funky aspect, the residence of the Vice President in the United States, the Naval Observatory, for the last 10 years, it has had an Indian kitchen. Kamala Harris, when she was there, she had an Indian kitchen, right? Now, JD Vance with Usha Vance would still be an Indian kitchen. So that's one thing we have in the US Vice President's official residence, talking of culture. Now, yes, I teach culture, I teach American culture, I teach Indian culture, I teach cross culture. So cultural immersion is absolutely one of the best ways, the only ways, there's a saying that travel makes a man wise, generally said, right? It's, I don't know who's ever said it, but travels open up our minds, and travels to, let's say if you're coming to India, of course it opens up your mind too. That's why I use the term immersion to, the colors, the senses, the smells, the thinking styles, the hustle bustle or the hustle of the market, the sounds, the number of people that you see, which comes as a shock to many people on Indian streets, right? So, and of course, the inherent spirituality and that philosophical attitude of life, okay, life goes on, and resilience. All of those, are part of India's culture, one would say. So definitely the children would get some exposure to that. And it does add to the soft power, of course, with Vance. But bottom line, any nation, any leader, be it a Vance or be it an Indian origin, let's say Kamala Harris were to be the president she's of Indian origin, she would absolutely look after American interests.
Of course, of course. Tim Rice, let me get you in here then. How important is this Indian partnership strategically for the United States? How important is this strategic friendship, and which way forward do we expect it to go under the Trump presidency?
I'm sorry, is this for me?
Yes.
That's probably outside of my purview, but it seems to me that if we take a wider look at the Trump administration and actually what they've been doing, not necessarily what they've been saying, by, say, blowing up the USAID and dismantling all of the soft power initiatives that have been built up over the last several decades, I would say that that one cannot be very optimistic about that. The other thing is, one of your guests mentioned the idea, very interesting, about in India, that the guest is treated as a very special person. And looking at JD Vance and the way that he treated the president of Ukraine by just insulting him to his face and demanding that he apologize in a most rude fashion, really is an indication of the deficiencies of Vance. And then, of course, the other thing that I neglected to mention was his catastrophic visit to Greenland.
My question was more on the India-US partnership. I do understand, obviously, you're not a fan of JD Vance. I could make that out from your first answer itself. But just talking about the India-US partnership, let's just focus a bit on that. Where do you see those ties headed, and how important should this partnership be for the United States?
It should be very important. The idea of the United States working closely with India is very important, especially with regard to the threat that China poses in the South China Sea, which is actually where I live. So, from my perspective, from our perspective in the Philippines, the U.S.-Indian partnership is of vital importance.
Absolutely. Why don't you just elaborate on that? As you said, you're based there, and where we've seen the growing aggression by China, obviously to counter that, the US should work closely with India, and they are. So do you see the Quad also getting further impetus by this partnership?
Well, one would hope so. It's just, as I say, I've seen too much chaos from the Trump administration as a whole. So, for example, very briefly, during the Biden administration, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense carefully built up this military and diplomatic relationship between the United States, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines in order to try and keep the sovereignty of the Philippines and keep China out of.
Okay, that's a fair point you're making. Before I come to Micah Pickus, let me get a quick response from Pathikrit Pine. You can, of course, respond to Jim Rice. Also, Pathikrit, according to you, why don't you talk about why this partnership is so important and where you believe it's going to head under the Trump and Vance presidency and vice presidency?
Look, I mean, when an individual comes as vice president, don't look at it that way. It's the nation that is representing. So invariably, whoever comes will be treated with the utmost respect. See, I think there are many areas of convergence between United States and India. Their films and their culture is very important, very popular. The Indians have been very successful in the United States. So it's a symbiotic relationship. But at the same time, I think the Americans also realize that India is not going to be a lackey in some of the European lackeys of United States. So we have our own areas where we would stick. And let me say this, yes, there are areas of convergence. Yes, South China Sea is a concern. Yes, the dumping that the Chinese does is also a concern. But at the same time, what is happening today is this, whether it is India or somebody else, while we are having close collaboration in probably small modular reactors, that is a very close area, nuclear energy. Ravinderji mentioned about trust, which is a manifestation of initiative for critical and emerging technology. That is also there. But I think India is also making it very clear we are not going to be importing technology anymore. You have to make us a very critical part of the supply chain. That is very important. On the other aspect, let's say, I'll just take 10 more seconds. I think countries like India are making it very clear. If we have a dependence on China for, say, components, there was a dependence, there is still a certain kind of dependence. We are not going to shift that dependence from the Chinese to the Americans. So we would have a diversified area where we would be, treating with everybody. We may have our own preferences. America is a very close partner. But at the same time, we would be monitoring, we would be regulating, we would be checking the Chinese. Indians would be very happy if investments come, but we are not going to disown the Chinese or the Russians either because, the world keeps on changing. So you can't just put all the eggs in the same basket. Same for the Americans as well. That's true.
Micah Pickus, let me quickly draw you in here as well on, these aspects of the India-US partnership, what makes it special. Also, the fact is, do you expect AI tech to also figure in the talks, given that JD Vance obviously is focusing on that as well? He last met Prime Minister Modi, in fact, at the summit on AI in France, in fact, where India had shared it at the special invitation of President Macron of France. Also, as far as its trade deal is concerned, of course, it's not going to be inked or final during this visit by JD Vance, but do you believe it will help in progression and it will help in the talks going in the right direction as well, because we do hope to strike a good deal to lower our tariffs?
Yeah, let's see. You got a couple of questions packed in there. Let me back up upstream a little bit. The first thing I should mention is I'm going to backtrack a little bit, which is that with regard to Usha Vance and whether she's of Indian origin and Hindu, all that stuff. If you actually look at the messaging from the Ministry of External Affairs of India, there's no mention of that, right? So they're sort of keeping things very above board. It's very professional. It's just she's coming, she's showing up, the second family is coming, that's it, right? So that part at least is not playing a super large role from an official standpoint. As far as emerging technologies and AI are concerned, yes, I understand Vance's interest in that, but I'll go back to what Jim Rice said, which is that I have questions about, regardless of whether, yes, people have said, okay, Vance's Indian wife may give him a home field advantage of sorts, maybe, but is he also going to turn around and start lecturing Indians? We when Zelensky showed up to the White House, he was lambasted, and then had the bravery to then show up on Fox News a couple hours later to kind of try and backtrack things. He was our honored guest, and that's how we treated him. are we going to do the same thing? That would, if we do that, then that reinforces stereotypes about Americans wanting things to work one way and not willing to extend the same courtesy to others, which is bad for diplomacy. So if Vance is more courteous, and I actually have reason to believe that there are differences in behavior between Vance himself and sort of Trump Vance, if that makes sense, because initially he was a huge critic of Trump. Maybe his wife will have some influence him on this while he's visiting India. Hard to say, but yes, I think first and foremost, AI, emerging technologies, that will definitely be a subject of interest. I think as some of our other guests mentioned, India has a booming tech sector that's growing. I mean, you guys have like over 1 billion people, so just by numerical numbers, like there are people to feed that growing sector. And then as far as trade is concerned, yes, I think we will begin to see fruitful developments, but it all hinges on which Vance shows up tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. in India. If it's a courteous Vance, then yes, I think he'll work very well with Modi. I think we could see leaps and bounds. If not, it could backtrack.
All right. Well, we are hoping, of course, for a very productive visit. And let's certainly hope that these talks, of course, go very well and elevate the partnership to a whole new dimension. Thank you very much to all of our guests for joining us. Let's take a short break.